Behavioral Economics and the Center for Social and Behavior Change at Ashoka University. And we've been supported by Umidyar Network India and Umidyar Network. So both CSPC and Busara Center are engaged in bringing about impactful behavior change in India and the rest of Global South. We work with governments and other partners to help understand the human behavior and then design solutions to scale services and policies for the low-income and marginalized populations. Umidyar Network is a philanthropic investment firm dedicated to harnessing the power of markets to create opportunities for people to improve their lives. Established in 2004 by philanthropists Pam and Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, and the organization has committed more than 1 billion in they've committed more than 1 billion to innovative for-profit companies and non-profit organizations to catalyze economic and social change. Today, Brithi from Busara Center would present the INTACT experiments and our results to you. She's an engagement director with Busara and has been leading the charge at INTACT. So over to you, Rithi.
Great, thank you so much, Priyanka. So I'm just going to share my screen. Great, so I hope everyone can see it. All right. So, as Priyanka said that we are looking to study the behavioral aspects of data privacy, which is actually quite a nebulous term if you think about it, because privacy means different things to different people. But when we look at people's privacy behaviors, what we found was that there is this great privacy paradox where, what people say about caring about privacy is very different from how they actually act. And what we call this in behavior science is the intention action gap, where people intend to do something, but they fall short when the time comes to take action. So why does this actually happen? According to traditional economics, human beings are rational and, we make choices to maximize utility. But in reality, what we find is that we aren't rational, and there are a lot of factors in our environment and a lot of, internal cognitive biases which come into play when we are making decisions. And what we find is that when we talk about privacy and privacy decision-making, the same seems to be holding true. And there are a bunch of biases which come into play. Say, for instance, when we have to make a privacy decision around downloading an app or sharing certain, information of ours, while we might hold it really dear that, okay, we are not going to share this sort of information, but in that moment, we go ahead and do that. And that is, for instance, the present bias, what we call that. The immediate payoff, that instant gratification becomes a lot more important than what is going to happen in the future. Another such, thing that we see when we talk about privacy is an information overload, because a lot of the privacy policies that you see are fairly long, around 3 to 6 pages on average. And there's just too much information for people to process, especially at that critical point of making a decision about, accessing a service which they really want. So to understand how we can work around these behavioral biases and design, certain interventions, certain nudges, where we can kind of bypass these and nudge people into being more conscious about their privacy decision making. That's exactly what we wanted to do at INTACT. And broadly, we had 2 research questions which we were trying to tackle through this piece of work that we were doing. The first is that how can changing the presentation of privacy policies or providing some sort of additional nudges, such as privacy ratings, make consumers more privacy conscious while they are making decisions? And the second implication of this that we wanted to study was that, is there an advantage for businesses to be more privacy giving? So when a service provider is signaling to consumers that they are securing their privacy better, does that actually end up being an advantage for them in the market? So these are the true broad questions that we've tried to answer through our research. So moving on, how exactly do we do this? So how exactly can we nudge individuals to be more privacy conscious? So we went into this entire, process of designing nudges, which would sort of, signal to people to move to decision making, which is responsible and which, kind of is intrinsically valuable to them, so that they can make decisions which are right for them, not exactly what we want them to do. So that's how we designed a bunch of these nudges around the cognitive biases, which I mentioned earlier. So I'll just go through, what these nudges that we tested were. So the first one was a set of standardized labels in the form of ratings. So we wanted to see that, if we have some information labels or some sort of a star rating, which is given to an online service or an app, how does that actually translate into people's decision making about how they want to share their information with that app? So, we wanted to test a range. So we tested from 1 star, 2 star, and a 4 star rating. And the hypothesis that we had for this was that a lower rating, which is a 1 star or a 2 star, would lead to lesser willingness to share information compared to a higher rated service provider with a better privacy policy. Saying that willingness to share information, which can also be thought of as, I trust you with my data, so I would share more. So our hypothesis was that the willingness to share information would increase as the rating increases. So this was our first set of nudges. Then the next one that we have was a summary fact sheet, where we wanted to take the 5-page privacy policy, which we were going to be presenting to people as part of our experiment, to cull out the main points and to present it in a visually appealing and a much more succinct way, which is what we've done over here, as you can see. So the idea over here was to see if people can understand and grasp things better if they are presented in a more succinct manner to them. And the hypothesis here was that presenting a short summary of the privacy policy will not only reduce the time spent, but it will also improve the comprehension or the understanding of the policy terms. So this is what we were trying to achieve with this intervention. So the next set of nudges that we had was costly signaling. And over here, the premise was that, if a business is signaling that they are willing to guarantee that, they are holding your data with the utmost safety and security, and, in case there is any breach, they will to a third party, which could be a regulator or a government, that is actually signaling that, I am so sure of the fact that I am securing your data that I'm willing to put money on it, So almost seeing like what a price or a fine signal would do in terms of data sharing for people. And what we hypothesized over here was that a costly signal or a guarantee in the form of privacy safeguards by businesses are likely to increase the willingness to share information. And then we had another nudge, which was around, along with the privacy policy, showing people this little infographic which explains how exactly their data will be used, which is for marketing or for research, legal compliance, etc. Because the understanding is also that people really deeply care about how you're using their data. So if as a provider you are upfront about how you're using your data, people's data, that would lead to an increase in their willingness to share information with you, since you've been so upfront about disclosing that clearly. So that was the hypothesis that we wanted to test for this intervention. And then the last one that we had was one which we called the cooldown period, where respondents are made to stay on the privacy policy screen for a 6-minute cooldown. So we arrived at this figure of about 6 minutes because the policy that we had took around 6 minutes to read. So while in reality, of course, it might not be a possibility to force people to stay on a privacy policy for 6 minutes, but because we were testing this out, we wanted to, go all out and see what impact that ends up happening. And what it also does is that it cools down people from a hot state of decision making. It literally gives you that time to think before you go ahead and share your information. It gives you time to process. So that's the whole idea behind the cool down nudge that we had. So yeah, the hypothesis we were testing here was that people who get this nudge would end up understanding the policy much better than the others. So testing these nudges. So once we had, our nudges ready, we wanted to find a way to test these out on different groups of people and seeing what result we get, what is the difference between someone who gets one nudge compared to another. So we had to construct a way to measure this. So how exactly are we going to say that our control group, which only sees the privacy policy, versus the other groups which see the privacy policy along with a nudge, perform differently from the control group? So we had a bunch of variables that we constructed. So the first one that we had was willingness to share sensitive information. So here we had a set of 30 invasive questions which had to be answered with a yes or no. And you can see these questions here. So these were questions about people's behaviors. And the idea was that if a person is more trusting, or if a person believes that your privacy policy is good enough, they would end up sharing more information or admitting to more behaviors than otherwise. So how we use this measure is that we devise an invasive score by summing over the number of yeses that a particular respondent says. The next measure that we had was the willingness to share personal information. So over here, what we did was that there was a set of 10 questions which could actually be attributed to the individual who was taking the survey, because it spoke about their political views, things about their health, like do you have HIV or what medications they are currently on, and also a bit about their financial behaviors, about their savings or taking a loan, etc. And the idea was that we were going to tell them that if they provide us with this information, they will have a chance to take part in future surveys and earn some payout basis that. So that became the willingness to share personal information. Again, the hypothesis here is that people who share more information means that they are willing to part with their personal information, meaning that they have implicitly more sort of trust and wanting to share the information with that particular online service provider. The next two measures that we had were the time spent on the privacy policy, which is to see how much time each group is going to be, each treatment group, spends on reading the policy. And then obviously the comprehension, that how much do they recall from the privacy policy, and what they really understood from that. So these were broadly the four measures that we were looking at. And the way that this experiment was set up was in three parts. So part one is, when people begin the survey, they are obviously given a consent form. And then we show them the full privacy policy, which is a 5-page policy. And that accompanies one of the nudges that, I previously showed you. So they are randomly assigned to a group. So we had in total about 11 treatment groups and one control group, which only saw the privacy policy and was not shown a nudge. Then once they see the policy, they see the nudge, they agree to it, they move ahead to the survey questions, which is the sensitive questions and the personalization questions, which I just showed you. And then towards the end, we had a set of 10 comprehension questions to test how they do on their understanding of the policy. And we ran this experiment online. So initially we were going to run this in a behavioral lab in India and in Kenya, but because of the virus, we ended up moving everything online. And in India, we had about 3,300 respondents. We ran this on Pollfish using Qualtrics. And overall, what we found was that we had a fairly well-distributed sample in terms of the age. We had most people between 18 to 40. There was a slight skew towards men in the sample. Overall, people were fairly well educated. More than 60% of the sample had a higher degree. And income levels were also, quite well distributed, as you can see, but largely a middle income sample is what we had. So that's a bit about, how we ran the experiment and, the demographics of the people who took part in our experiment. So I'm just going to now move on to the results and what we actually found, that out of all these different nudges that we tested, what ended up working the best in terms of our outcome measures. So this is actually a graph which is showing, as you can see, there is the control group, which is at the bottom. This is the number of yeses which each treatment ended up saying. And what we find is, in the top three, we have the Cooldown, we have the 4-star combination of label, and then we have the usage case. But what we find is statistically significant in terms of difference from the control group is only the Cooldown period over here. And then we also had the willingness to share information for personalization, where we find again that the Cooldown period and the 4-star end up doing the best, with the Cooldown being statistically significant. So what does this exactly mean? So broadly, we find that two sets of nudges ended up working the best. The first one, obviously we have the privacy ratings, where the hypothesis stands, verified, that lower ratings of 1 and 2-star elicit lower willingness to share information, whereas those which were rated higher ended up, having people share a lot more information. Like you can see over here, there is a clear, increase from 1-star to 4-star. People are sharing a lot more information for 4-star compared to those who saw the 1-star. And so the directionality that we had in terms of our hypothesis stands true, that having a higher rated privacy policy increases the chances of the consumer trusting you and sharing more information. So this is the first, nudge that worked. And then the second one, of course, which was the star, which outperformed, all the nudges, was the Cooldown period, where we found that it definitely increased the comprehension. Here you can see that the number of correct answers for the Cooldown period is by far the highest compared to any of the others. And also in terms of, the control group, we found that people who were in the Cooldown period, who ended up staying on the privacy policy page, not only understood the privacy policy better, but were more comfortable in answering the invasive and personalization questions, both of which were statistically significantly higher than those which were shared by the control group, which only saw the privacy policy. So we find that, comprehension improved significantly, and the sharing of information also, since, they felt more comfortable about the service provider, they were willing to share more, admit to more invasive behaviors, and also share more of their personal information. So broadly, these are the two nudges which end up doing the best. The star ratings, which are these, the star ratings and the information labels, which show people, the security and privacy of the service provider, and the Cooldown period, where people are made to stay on the screen for about 6 minutes. So, I've tried to be pretty succinct with this presentation, and happy to, answer any questions which you guys might have on our methodology or the results. And also, one of the purposes for really having this session today is that our study was more of a study in an experiment which we wanted to do in a lab setting. But the real essence of this is, if we can, take this idea of ratings maybe to a regulator, or this idea of a cool down, to businesses, and see what their, take is on how these can actually be applied in the real world. So over to you, Zainab, Priyanka.
Thanks, Riddhi. This was quite interesting. There is a question from Indra, but I think we could probably take it in a bit. What I wanted to do was to invite two people to respond initially. First is Nancy Chauhan, who's an engineer at Grofers and who's also been a speaker at some of the HasGeek events, and Chaitanya Hegde, who's data scientist at Aether and has been a very active participant and reviewer for a lot of the work that has been presented by other speakers at HasGeek. So I thought maybe we'll start with Nancy first. And Nancy, I think it'll be useful if your response could be also in terms of what you've seen in terms of user behavior and privacy in your own work at Grofers. And then if you have any immediate responses or questions to ask Riddhi, and of course feel free to kind of chip in with your own responses, and then we can go to Chaitanya for responding similarly. So Nancy, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah. Hi everyone.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So yeah. So like I just went through the presentation and it's really great. Like it's awesome. I was just like as far as I worked in at my place and I could gain from the experience. So it was about like the privacy practices of the online platforms and business and how does it affect, right? So so I had like something to say about that. I don't know if that goes in the same direction. Like the data breaches which happens, right? At and it impacts the customer trust and business, like how the customers uh, see the particular product. Like for example, we had that Aadhaar card uh, breach and or the other things. So yeah, like this is something which I analyzed according to whatever I saw. So like I think does this go into the same direction?
I think it should be fine if you were to elaborate a little bit more on this, Riddhi.
Yeah, I mean, Nancy, I would love to hear what your kind of takeaway, or like you said that you analyzed that situation of that breach. So what exactly was?
Yeah, for example, like there is some kind of breach, right? For example, take an example of Twitter, which like recently there was a hack and something. So if there is a breach of any kind of breach, then it impacts the customer trust and eventually the business. So like, what's your take on this? Like,
Absolutely. In fact, the two costly signals which we had tested, unfortunately, we didn't find too much of a significant impact of that. How can we make businesses more accountable? And if there is a business which is willing to, put their reputation on stake and be like, hey, we are willing to guarantee that we are going to safeguard your data, what does that really mean for consumers? Does that translate into people switching over to that particular business provider? Does that mean more customer loyalty? Does that mean a greater market share eventually? So these are definitely questions that were like higher order questions as we were designing that. And we definitely did see that people who saw the costly signals were sharing a little bit more data, but our results were not statistically significant enough for us to say that yes, people really do care about there being some authority which is going to fine them if there is a data breach, etc. So I think based on our initial findings, we cannot really say anything in terms of yes, for sure people do care about this, but when you ask people, their stated preference is that yes, they really do. But according to our experiment, we weren't able to really find or isolate an impact of the data breach related treatment that we tested.
yeah.
Any other questions that you have, Nancy? Or you can feel free to chip in later.
Yeah, I'll just ask later. Like I'll just go into the conversation.
Sure,
Like
sounds good. Thanks a lot. Chaitanya, how about yourself? And also if you can introduce yourself at the start. Chaitanya, we can't hear you.
Hello. Hey, can you hear?
Yeah, now yes.
Yeah, sorry. I had muted my laptop. I didn't. I'm Chaitanya. I work at Aether Energy. I was in the data science team for a long time. Now I'm working as a product manager for sort of data-related products, all the smart products we have at Aether Energy. So here I had a couple of questions. Some both based on sort of personal experience and what I've seen at Aether. Right. One of the things actually someone asked in the chat as well. Nadika asked in the chat about like the ratings you give, right? Are like who sort of decides that? How do we even trust who does that? And are you looking at like a regulator who does that, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, which was also, when we were designing this rating nudge, that what all constitutes the rating, like what all goes into rating a privacy policy or the privacy practices of a particular provider, and B, who is the person who is the authority which is going to be doing this independently, or who's going to be doing this. And absolutely right, it is the role of a regulator. And the first step to establish was that do ratings work, which I think has been established by our study. And the next step is to really take this to of course, in India right now, we don't have a regulator, but to take it to Niti Aayog and to take it to the Ministry of IT. And there is also another private player called Arca. I don't know if you're aware of them, but they have actually worked on creating what the back end of this rating would look like. They have like some 52 parameters which go into assessing the privacy rating for a particular entity. But all these things are actually up for debate, because that is essentially the next step, that who is going to give these ratings, and is this going to be something which is going to be trusted by people? Like, for instance, if you see an ISO or you see some sort of a certification like that, people instantly know that, or you see an FSSAI on food, you trust that. So of course, in India, with the PDP bill and, seeing the direction that takes, and also if and when we do have a regulator who is going to take up this mandate. So I think for us, it is really the next step is to take this to the government, because for service providers to come up with this rating on their own is something which is also very contentious, because you will have the bigger players trying to influence what all should go into the rating according to what works best for them, what would rate them the highest. So we want, so definitely this has to be someone who is a third party which is independent of the service providers. So that's broadly, the direction that we think that this would, have to take. But happy to hear what other inputs that you guys might have on this. And I think we also have Dhwani from our team over here. So Dhwani, if at any point you want to chime in, please feel free.
Also, I think it makes sense to mention Apple's initiative to introduce nutrition label-like, information display on their app store, which I think they're going to launch towards the end of the year. I think the biggest criticism that we've read is that, they have to be self-reported by the apps, and hence, the credibility that of self-reporting of data usage is being questioned. So, it will be interesting to see if Apple also comes up with, a workaround to this criticism, and, how they work around this. But yeah, if we could get inputs from your side on how do you think this could play out, would be great as well.
So Priyanka was wondering if Chaitanya wanted to chip in with the other questions, and then I think Indra has some really useful points, and I know he has to leave in some time, but maybe he could also chip in. Yeah, Chaitanya, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So then one more thing I wanted to ask is, so basically, like you had a concept which showed like sort of breaking down visually into multiple sort of branches of what the policy says. the other one which basically had like a 6-minute wait time, right? But a lot of times from what I've seen in the apps, where you can like whenever a certain thing is needed, they pop up and ask, so that user is sort of forced to look at the what they want to accept or don't accept and sort of respond to that, right? Rather than a one big sort of a monolith, right? Maybe like either maybe visually, or this one, if you keep prompting them, do you think that sort of a thing would work better? Because I feel like a 6-minute, obviously, as you mentioned, real life also probably won't work out. So you'll have to find like some halfway where you can make sure people read certain things, right? What do you think is that something you think will work out?
Absolutely. I think, pop-ups is something that we end up seeing a lot more also. In fact, as part of our round 2, like nowadays, you must have seen that there are a lot of these pop-ups which come up, especially like for cookies, right? That these are the cookies. Do you accept our cookie policy? You guys must have noticed that this has started coming a lot more. So, in fact, in the next round, we want to test out this concept, like, unfortunately on our interface currently that we are testing, is more of like an experiment flow of next and not really a pop-up. But we do want to test out how giving people choice for consenting to different uses, that you have a choice to, okay, only for marketing my data can be used, or my data cannot be used. So giving people that granular sort of consent is something that we are testing out. But currently, for our experiments, what we are working with, the platform that doesn't allow us to, have these pop-ups coming up at different times. But I think once we do these tests online, and once we do tests in a lab setting, the next step usually for us is to do a market test, where we test our nudges on an actual, app, or with an actual service provider. So with that, of course, we will be able to test, on multiple, like, different sorts of interfaces and different ways in which, we are at different points during the user journey where these nudges kind of come up. So I think this is something which we can develop the ideas further. And if there is an actual service provider with whom we can do a live market test, like we have done for certain other projects, that would be like the next step in order to really test that out. Does that answer your question, Chaitanya?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I had one last question. I don't know if I have time, but I don't know if there are like standard templates for privacy policy, but like, for example, copyright, right? I know, like, whenever someone says MIT license, I know what to expect, or Apache license, what to expect. With these privacy policies, I don't know, like, if like some company has put like a clause which like might not be summarized at the top level, right? There might be nuances. Is there, like, I don't know if there is a scope for like sort of templates, standardized ones, which maybe the sort of fits in with your rating system as well, where like these are what is used by different industries or whatever might be helpful. That is one other thing.
Right. So you're suggesting that when a provider wants to come up with a policy, for them to be able to use that, or for a user to be able to like quickly discern, through that template, that okay, this is what it's looking like.
Right, like this template means that these are the data collected, this is the retention period,
Okay.
something like that. Something else might be something else. Like different companies might need different things, but for certain other services, which, yeah, something like that.
So almost something like around the way the policy is being presented, like culling out like the key sort of facts, or like showcasing a different sort of set of disclosures is what we were calling them.
Right, like yeah, a 6-minute, like I might not be able to go through the whole thing, or like even if you reduce the time, and I might, because I'm not a legal person, I might not be able to like go through like individual points and grasp that, right? So maybe yeah.
Yeah, in fact, what we were thinking was that the cooldown has worked really well. But like you said, 6 minutes is very long. So what if, we actually combine the summary fact sheet, which takes about a minute to read, with the cooldown, where we show, instead of like the 6-minute pause, you have like a 30-second, or like a, we'll have to determine that 30-second or 60-second pause on the summarized version, where people can just quickly kind of grasp what's there in the policy. So I guess that is something which is possible.
But I think there's a lot of merit in the standardization of the policy as well. Like as Chaitanya mentioned, like if you know that, okay, the retention period of information is standardized across, different providers and businesses, and they can only retain your information for 3 months or 6 months, and that, that becomes common knowledge. I think there's a lot of potential in that idea, can be explored.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good, thanks. I'm good, thanks.
Priyanka, if you want to take over from here, I do see some inputs from Indra. I don't know if we could read them out for the audience's benefits. You could do that. And I think Shivangi has a few responses on certification, but I'll let you dive it.
So Shivangi, if you would like to come in and share inputs. I know you mentioned work at ARCA on, the back end of how the rating system could work. Inputs on those would be very helpful to us.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, and Riddhi, thanks for referring that. I think we have a long way to go over there, but just a few thoughts on what also made us look at this. And I thought I'll, in general, share what we've studied of the certification ecosystems in general. Typically, you have the regulator, who sort of comes up with standards for even how certification will work. So there is a regulator usually present, and certifying bodies who, as Riddhi rightly put, are folks who are, essentially people whom someone can rely on. So they're traditionally trusted third parties, as they're called. And then, of course, you have people who will rely on this, right? So these are the three sort of pillars. Under the GDPR, in fact, they have started, they've come up with guidances for building certifications, as certifying bodies as such. And I think that's how it will probably pan out. So that's to address how I think this whole thing will work. But however, because one can't wait for regulation to drive this, also you have, ecosystems that have emerged like TrustArc and all that, which give out their own certification, and over a period of time, if people start trusting it, then it emerges as something that catches on, a bit like how the whole 20 years ago the whole SSL world developed, with VeriSign driving the SSL certification schema, and others came up. There was no regulator over there. So one is not sure how this is going to pan out. I think there will be different experiments, and we ourselves are planning to see if we can do something along these lines. It's very hard to parameterize, as you rightly said, 52 parameters, but it constantly keeps changing, and so one will have to try out different models to see what really works and finally sits well with the two key stakeholders, which is the organizations who are on the side of consuming of information, and the people who, folks like us who are giving out information. So that's what I wanted to share on certification. The other question that you asked is in terms of the actual parameters that are used itself, right? And we've been grappling with this, in fact, for the last 6 to 8 months, because it's a bit like unraveling. You start with one thing, what is there or what is visible to the front end, but then when you start actually going in, you realize that every single, for example, statement in that notice cascades down to multiple controls and practices and processes that an organization follows, which the larger it is, the more complex it is. So one has to figure out where to draw the line, because on one hand, you want ratings which are simple, which everybody can understand, like what you have spoken about. Or at this other end of the spectrum, you have people who actually qualify and certify entire organizational processes, like the ISO standards and the BSCI privacy framework and all of those, which is a long way. Somewhere we need to find a balance so that there is trust built into the system, because you can't wait for 2 years, 3 years, the amount of time it sometimes takes for organizations to come up the learning curve and actually implement the processes against which they guarantee. So I don't have answers. I'm just sharing some thoughts with you all over here. I don't know if it helps.
No, absolutely. I think this is I think you've echoed a lot of the points that we have also been grappling with, and what we've come across. So I think it's good to kind of hear similar kind of opinions and ways forward to what we are also thinking. So thank you for sharing that.
Are there any other questions for the team?
I think it might kind of help to respond to one of Indra's questions, which was regarding the rating, and if Riddhi or Dhwani have a response to that, which was about the user-generated ratings, which he believes may not be useful, may not be meaningful because of the binary nature, and users don't have reason to give anything less than 5 stars unless a breach has happened or a violation of terms by the organization, at which point users will probably rate it at a 0. There's also the threat of hostile actors who, for no reason, may try to lower companies' privacy rating. So I think it might be useful to kind of put a response to that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, in fact, early on itself, during the design phase, we had kind of decided that when we are talking about ratings, these are ratings which are done by an independent, like, third party, and not by users, because there is also a lot of confusion about, is this a rating regarding privacy, or is this a rating regarding the service and the product. So it becomes a little confusing, and the line gets a bit blurred for users. And of course, all the perils that you have, that Indra has kind of mentioned about, only say the bad cases being reported, or somebody wanting to swing the ratings a certain way. So definitely, we are thinking also in terms of a regulator or some sort of a certification, ecosystem which needs to be developed, not driven by users. So I think this is something that we were pretty clear about even while we were designing this. Dhwani, any other thoughts on that? Yeah, I think that's pretty much, we are pretty much in aligned with what Indra is saying.
Sure, thanks, Riddhi. Priyanka, Riddhi, I think it might help if you have any kind of indications of where this project is going, what's coming next, and if there's going to be another round of inputs that you would be seeking.
Yeah, so maybe I can just quickly share with you all that this was the nudges that we tested right now was round 1. We have round 2, which is a set of fresh nudges that we've created around privacy, which we are currently in the process of testing. So hopefully by next month we will have results of that as well. I think what would be really useful would be to run those by you as well, and B, in case there are any ideas of nudges or interventions which you feel would be interesting to test out, that would be something that we would be eager to hear, that if something that you think can really work well in nudging people to think about privacy. So I think these are the two main sort of things that we'd be keen on getting your feedback on. Anything else, Priyanka, you want to add to that?
No, like if we could get, any thoughts that, anyone has, even later, and could be sent to us via Zenab or via email, that we'd be grateful for that.
There is another question, Riddhi, that's come up from Nadika, and she was, her question was, I'm going through the work in progress report and was wondering, the costly signaling doesn't seem to be much of an influence, and to her that's surprising. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so I mean, that is actually something that we were surprised about as well, that, there were definitely, I'm just trying to just pull out the data exactly for costly signals, but this is something that, we really thought would work, that especially if somebody is telling me that they are willing to guarantee and, pay me maybe ₹1,00,000 if there's a data breach, I would probably go out and share all my data. But I guess that's the thing about human behavior, and that's the whole point of our experiments, is to really see that what clicks, because a lot of times, say product managers and all of us come up with thinking that this is how people should behave, but how people actually end up behaving is what their actual behavior is, which was kind of the results of this study. So just give me a moment, I'm just trying to pull out yeah, so actually we ran the study, like the results which I shared with you were from India. We also ran the same study in Kenya. And what we found in the Indian sample, we found that, people were sharing the least amount of data when they saw these costly signals. So it ended up having the opposite, exactly opposite impact of what we thought it would. And in Kenya, we actually found a statistically, opposite result, which was that the price cost signaling ended up having the lowest score in terms of people's willingness to share their personal information. So when people were being told that, hey, we will pay you this much if there's a data breach, people were not buying into it. People were not believing it. And they ended up not sharing their information, meaning that they weren't comfortable about this whole trade-off between price and their data. So that's interesting, because there isn't a trade-off that people are seeing between data risk and a financial reward in lieu of that. So I think that's interesting, that people are not willing to trust you just because you're putting money out there. So that's the kind of conclusion that we can draw from that. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question, Nadika?
Yeah, she seems to be saying thank you and interesting on YouTube.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I don't know if there are any concluding thoughts from Nancy, Shivangi, Chaitanya, and the others.
Actually, I had one more question. I think with this discussion, I'm still slightly surprised by the 6-minute thing, right? Do you is this also the because people had an inkling that this is sort of a survey that they ended up reading 6 minutes? Do you think, say, even if you give say shorter content for say a minute or two, will people actually read that if we do that? Or do you think this is I'm slightly unsure how to take that as this one, if we were to do anything with that, right? Because
yeah. So, Chaitanya, with the cooldown period, the idea was that, we were, according to our hypothesis, the main effect that it was going to have was on the comprehension, which it did, that people ended up understanding the policy much better, which seems to be fairly obvious, right? But what we also found was that when people understood and studied the policy, they were actually willing to answer more questions, and they were willing to share more information, which means that implicit that, hey, you actually forced me to read your policy, which means that you're confident about it. I am willing to put my trust in sharing that information with you. So that is something that we found with the cool down period, that it actually elicited more trust and more comfort in terms of people being willing to share their information. And the question about if this is reduced to 2 minutes or 30 seconds or 1 minute, what will the impact of that be, is something that we would have to actually run an experiment and see. And that was something that we were considering for round 2, which was to, should we shorten the cool down period or combine it with some other treatment and see what happens. So I can't really say what we can expect, but we were very pleasantly surprised with the fact that the cool down did well on all the parameters: comprehension, willingness to share personal information, as well as admitting to behaviors. So it clearly shows that when people read policies, they actually feel more comfortable about the provider and about their privacy.
Right. Yeah, I think intersection of this with the sort of the user onboarding experience, for which the companies will try to do, right, would be the holy grail to chase on how best to do this.
Yeah, and I mean, if you have any other thoughts about how this cool down can be, combined, or what we can do, I'd be like happy to, chat with you separately, or just feel free to drop me a line. We'd be happy to, maybe test that out going forward.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah.
Riddhi, one question I had was, this is Shivangi, are you planning to look at different formats of the privacy policy itself? Because today we assume that the construct of the policy, the way it is today, long legal sounding documents in, written in English, or maybe even if it's in another language, is the way to go, and using that as the base, you do certain assumptions. But I think, there have been some thoughts about how even that policy itself can be made, sort of represented in a more user-friendly manner, so that people understand it itself, right? So, for example, the kind of information you collect itself can be represented maybe pictorially or in form of some graphics and so on. Are you planning to do any sort of work around that, about what kind of formats will work, not work?
Yeah, so in fact, two of the things that we tested, which was the summary fact sheet and the usage disclosure, did exactly that, we summarized the whole privacy policy, and then we also, had this one graphic which showed what are the 4 uses for your data that we are going to do. We didn't find, for the summary fact sheet, we didn't find any, statistically significant results, but for the usage, what we ended up finding was that when people were being upfront told about how we are using their data, they actually ended up sharing lesser. So our hypothesis was that they would probably share more now that they know how their data is being used. But actually, when we were showing them that infographic of how their data is being used, they ended up sharing less. And this was particularly in Kenya, we found this result. And another format that we are testing out in round 2 is a comic strip, which is like an illustration of the privacy policy and like the key terms, instead of like a fully like written out one. And we want to test this for 2 reasons. So one is that, of course, the privacy policy, the 5-pager, is something which even people like you and me, who are, literate, and usually these policies are in English, we don't have time or the attention span to really understand what's in those policies. So the idea is, A, for that population also we want to test it, and B is also, the vernacular the populations which don't, speak English. And most, providers, most services do not have the privacy policy in other languages. So if we have something like a simple illustration or like a comic strip which explains what's being said in the privacy policy, does that really lead to an improvement in their comprehension and just overall their decision making around privacy? So that is something we are testing in round 2.
Okay, great. That's interesting. Thank you.
Riddhi, there's a question from Azhar. He's asking, how close were these trials compared to real life scenarios, particularly with regards to the cooldown nudge? In the real world scenario, won't users just context switch and return later?
Yeah, so, like when I was also describing the cooldown period, yes, of course, it's something that we didn't expect to fully, be picked up in a real life scenario. But the results for the cooldown have been really promising. So there is merit in investigating further how cooldown, the period, can be reduced, or how it can be combined with some other treatment to make it more effective. But yes, this is something that we also thought about, because it is possible that, when you are on that cool down period, you probably put your phone down, or, you move away from the screen for those 6 minutes. So of course, this is an experiment. It's a simulation. It's not real life. But I think what's important is that we look at the results, and that's precisely why I think we are speaking with you, is because, you can give us the real world perspective of, hey, this is not going to work, or you need to relook at this, or you need to retest this in a way that it can actually be adopted. So I think the cooldown period is something we knew is a little bit outlandish from the beginning. But looking at the results, we are also, interested in testing shorter versions of it and different like combinations of it. And I think that will be interesting to see. But it's a point which we completely agree with. And we went into this experiment knowing this pitfall.
And we also have another question from Nadika. If you want to quantify a value, then the assumption could be how often has this happened for there to be a monetary value to this. So,
I think regarding the breaches, I guess that
partly signaling nudges.
Yeah, definitely. I think the messaging, so that's exactly, every nudge is really about messaging. So, for instance, in round 2, we are testing a set of messages around, nudging people to read the policies. So similarly for this breach, if we give a statistic along with like, we have a record of like not having any breaches so far, or being like we've calculated this monetary value basis something else. Of course, those are interesting nudges that we could design and nudge. But I think that's a good suggestion. Thanks, Nadika. We can look at maybe coming up with a costly signal based on some sort of monetary value basis, a real life event that people might actually be aware of, so they can kind of peg their thinking to that as a reference point.
Okay. So I think we've consumed our 60 minutes. I think all the questions and comments have been very useful for us, and forcing us to think in different directions on how these nudges can be made more impactful, and in what direction should we be looking at further. And we'd love to hear more from you, especially on the application in the real world and the implications of these nudges that you think can happen. And looking forward to our next interaction soon.
Yeah, and in the meanwhile, if folks have any questions, Intact has the study page on hasgeek.com. So do see hasgeek.com/intact. And I think Priyanka and Riddhi will be posting updates based on how the analysis progresses. And hopefully we should be seeing most of you in a month's time. Thanks a lot, Nancy, Chaitanya, Azhar, who's watching on YouTube, and Indra, who's left. Thanks for accepting the invitation and showing up. I think the questions were really helpful. And it's also something for us at HasGeek to think about as we're also looking at questions about privacy. Thanks, Priyanka and Riddhi, for hosting this session and for sharing the study. And looking forward to the next leg. All the best for the next for the analysis. I'm sure it'll be quite an exercise.
So yes, we will send out our final report to all the participants, and please look out. Check out intactprivacy.com for regular updates from us.
All right. Thanks everyone, and have a good evening. It's 7 p.m. So yes, have a good evening. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Shivangi.